Today on TFL Bike, we are revisiting the topic of my 1983 Honda Interceptor in this little behind-the-scenes video for those of you out there who are interested in the bike that I am daily riding. So this is a motorcycle, if you don't know, that I bought for about $3,000, and I caught some flack from my friends because when I bought it, it wasn't running, and it needed just a little bit of work. What we figured out is that the CDI was not sending the signal to the fuel pump, so the fuel pump wasn't running, and that's what was keeping this bike from going. And now it's all good to go, and I've been riding it for a couple hundred miles now in the last couple weeks, and there's still some things that I need to do to it, but I'm now getting pretty familiar with this bike, and I can talk a little bit about what it's like to ride. Now, I talked some about the history on this motorcycle when I did that initial video and it was up on the stand and I was showing it as it was, which at that point was not running. So if you want to see a little bit more about the history, you can check that out, and at some point down the line we might even spend a lot of time making a really highly produced video about the history on this bike, because it is pretty interesting. But the basics of it is that it's a 750cc V4, and that's pretty cool for me because I haven't owned a V4 before, and it's got a really cool quality to it. We'll get it out on the road in just a moment. But the thing that really drew me to this bike is the way that it looks. It's kind of a cheesy 80s looking bike, but that's exactly what I wanted. So it's got very much a Top Gun kind of style to it, and a very Top Gun name with it being called the Interceptor. And this one is visually in pretty decent shape. There's a couple spots on it that aren't perfect, but overall it's a pretty good bike. Now, as far as riding it and being around it goes, one thing that's definitely stood out for me on this motorcycle is the size and the weight. So it is over 500 pounds. I have it on the center stand now, and every morning when I take this out of the garage and push it off the center stand, there's always that moment of it hitting the ground and me thinking, wow, this is a bit of a beast. It's a long motorcycle too. Alex and I were riding in to work the other day, and he was on his Aprilia RS660, and that bike by comparison looks like it's a foot shorter. It's probably just a couple inches shorter, but this is a very long, very heavy motorcycle. Now let's go ahead and fire it up, and the sound might not come through on camera, or it might, because it's pretty loud, but there's definitely some top end noise on this bike. So if I end up keeping it in the long term, might do a top end rebuild on it. We'll see, but either way, it's still riding plenty fine. Now, I've done a couple things to this so far. At $3,000, this bike definitely needed a couple things. There's a few things that still needed. I replaced the speedo cable because the old speedo cable was buzzing when I got up to speed, and I pulled the old one off, and I was just going to clean it up and re-grease it and get it all ready to go. But I ended up getting a new one because part of it broke, the little tab that you actually screw in so it doesn't come out of the hub. So I replaced the speedo cable. We got the fuel pump working. Then I also had a pretty bad exhaust leak on it, and so I pulled the exhaust all apart and put some new gaskets in there so that that's all sealed up. So now I don't have that exhaust leak anymore, and it is running really happily. The carbs had been gone through not too long ago, from what I understand, about a year ago. So luckily the carbs seem really happy, and there's still a few things that I need to do to it. I need to put a thermostat in it. So not the guy I bought it from, but the guy who had this bike before him, he was tracking this motorcycle, so there's still some safety wire on a lot of the hardware on this bike, and he had also pulled the thermostat out of it, so you're not really going to see the bike get up to temperature on that screen throughout the course of this ride. But I do have a thermostat for it that I'm going to put into it, and I also have a new set of tires. These tires have plenty of tread on them, but they're on the older side, and I want to replace it with some fresh rubber. So those are a couple things that I have on the list of stuff I want to do to this motorcycle fairly soon. And you might also notice that this bike doesn't have mirrors on it right now. The mirrors that were on it weren't giving me enough adjustment for me to see past my shoulder. And if I did push the mirror far enough for me to see past my shoulder, it was running into the side of the fairing and kind of marking up the fairing at full lock. So I want to find a set of mirrors that's going to work better for me. But in the meantime, just getting to ride it, this bike is so much fun. Especially this motor has such a cool character to it. Again, this is the first V4 that I've gotten to own, and it's got a really interesting buzz to it. These are factory pipes, which I like because I'm commuting on this bike. I usually leave my house around 6 a.m. I don't want to be making a ton of noise, but even with this being a more muted tone, it still sounds pretty good. Here, I'll give it a little burst of acceleration again, and it pulls pretty much all the way to redline. I'll let you listen. Yeah, so it's a fun motor. It's an older bike. Like I said, it is heavy. It's not super torquey. It's about 46 pound-feet of torque and about 90 horsepower. But it pulls all the way through to redline, so it's a fun motorcycle to ring out. You'll also notice I'm not going to push it hard through these corners because, again, we're on pretty old tires here. I know that you can get enough heat in older tires to have them be plenty grippy and corner hard on older tires, but I'm on the street. My tires are not that warm right now, and I'm not going to push it. I don't feel like low-siding this bike because the bodywork is in good shape. But as far as the cornering goes on this motorcycle, it is a fun handling bike. There's definitely a little bit of a learning curve for me because the last couple bikes that I've had as my personal bikes have been pretty stable, pretty upright cruiser type bikes. And so you really have to hold them into a corner. You have to push them into a corner and keep them there. Whereas this bike will dive really happily into a corner and continue diving into a corner until you kind of stop that dive. So I don't know, it's not my greatest explanation, but definitely it's a fun cornering bike, and it's taken a little getting used to, but as time goes on, I'm having more fun pushing it a little further, again, until I get some better tires on this bike, which I have in my garage. Until I get those mounted up, I'm not going to take it too far. But overall, even as a commuter bike, this has been pretty fun. It is a little lean forward, so I feel it in my back after some longer rides, but in general, it's a pretty nice bike to commute on. Not a ton of wind protection. If I get really low, then I can stay in the bubble a little bit if I'm way down here, but effectively, the windshield's not doing a ton for me. I've still taken it on some decent highway stints, and it's pretty comfortable. It's happy at really any speed that you want to be at, so that part of it is nice on the highway. Got plenty of power, and it doesn't feel high-strung at highway speeds. And I think it helps too that the bike is not super loud, so you're not getting a ton of drone. And it's overall pretty comfortable. It's a decently plush seat, and there is some adjustment in the suspension here. I haven't gone in yet and really fine-tuned that because I'm still working on some bigger issues as far as what I had to do with Andy to get the fuel pump working and sealing up the exhaust where it was having those exhaust leaks. And that's all just happened pretty recently. This is really the first couple weeks that I'm getting to actually ride it a lot. So yeah, I've still got some stuff to do on it, but man, it's just good to be on a bike again, and this is a really fun bike to be on. Kind of my dream bike in this category would be a VFR 750, which is a really cool motorcycle, one that my good buddy Andy actually owned back in the day, and it's kind of an evolution. Well, it is an evolution of this bike. I really like the way those look and some of the changes that they made to them mechanically, so maybe someday I'll have the money to throw at a VFR. But for $3,000, this bike has been an awesome purchase. Again, I got a lot of grief from some friends for paying $3,000 for a bike that needed work right off the bat, but I'm very happy with the purchase. This has been awesome and continues to be awesome, and it's a blast to ride. And there's so many older sport bikes like this in this category from all the manufacturers that you can find for not a lot of money, and they're great bikes to ride. They're really cool machines with a lot of history, so I highly recommend it. If there's something like this that you see in your area and you're thinking maybe that would be a fun bike to buy, I recommend them because they're really cool. And yeah, it's not the highest performing thing by today's standard, but still plenty enough performance to enjoy yourself. I also want to take a quick second to thank our buddy over at Rider Justice. Our friend Scott there has been supporting our channel here reviewing bikes basically since day one, and it's because of him that we get to do all these reviews that we do. So if you ever need legal representation, either with you and your motorcycle or even with you and your car, make sure you call Scott first, because them and the team over there at Rider Justice, they're awesome. They're not just doing this as their job. It truly means a lot to them to be able to represent people on two wheels and on four wheels. So make sure you call Scott first if you need any of those services. Now, in conclusion, would I buy this bike again? Absolutely. And yeah, I do think that I'm going to hold on to it for a while. This is a really good motorcycle, and as long as these top end noises don't develop too much further and don't start causing me any huge issues, I'm just gonna do some more maintenance on it and keep riding it. I've got a CB750 that I'm doing an engine rebuild on right now, and once that motorcycle's all back together, then maybe I'll take this bike off the road and start to do a little work on the top end on this bike to get it completely sorted. But for now, this is just the bike that I have to ride, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Now, as far as the channel goes, not really my personal stuff like what we're talking about in this video for the most part, but as far as the bike channel goes, we have coming up really soon a series that we're doing with a bunch of mini bikes. So we sold the Aprilia Touareg that we've had for quite a while, and we're going to pitch that money into doing a series around a TNT 135, a CF Moto Papio SS, a Honda Grom, a Honda Monkey, and a Z125 Kawasaki. So, coming up very soon, we're going to start that series. We're going to start collecting those mini bikes. We already have a Grom. We need to buy a TNT 135 and a Papio SS. And we're going to talk to the folks over at Honda and Kawasaki to get a Grom and a Z125 respectively. So, keep your eyes peeled for that series, because it's going to be a ton of fun this summer, doing a bunch of comparisons with mini bikes. That's what's coming down the pipeline. But that's all for this video. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you've had either an Interceptor or a similar 80s sport bike, drop me a comment. Let me know what your experience has been with these bikes, and we'll see you in the next video.